A spiritual successor, but not a direct sequel to Night of the Living Dead. It's a movie that proves nothing is more terrifying than real life, because this one is based on a true story. With imagery burned into the memories of people who saw it too young, 40 years later it remains the scariest movie ever made. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of The Return of the Living Dead. Return of the Living Dead is a comedy horror film released in 1985, written and directed by Dan O'Bannon. It is rated R for realistic, extreme, and persistent violence, gore, adult material, adult situations, foul language, flashing lights, sexual content, alcohol use, smoking, nudity, graveyard nudity, punk rock music, piercings, disturbing images, frightening scenes, and for being really, really gross and psychologically damaging to 10-year-olds. In 1969, at the Pittsburgh VA hospital, there was a chemical spill. 2,4,5-trioxin, it's called. See, the Darrow Chemical Company was trying to develop it for the Army. It kinda leaked down into the morgue and made all the dead bodies kinda jump around as if they were almost alive. Turns out there was a movie made about the incident back in the 60s called Night of the Living Dead, only it didn't tell the whole story, because the Army threatened the director that if the true story got out, they would sue his ass off, so he had to move all the facts around. In reality, the Army closed it all down, then shipped all that contaminated dirt, all those dead bodies out, and they kept it a secret. Typical Army fuck-up. The transportation department got the orders crossed, and they shipped those bodies to the Uneeda Medical Supply warehouse instead of the Darrow Chemical Building. Just so happens that today, July 3rd, 1984, Uneeda Medical Supply warehouse manager Frank Johnson is training Freddy, a new employee, on the ins and outs of shipping and receiving. But first, Frank wants to show him the corpses down in the basement to prove it's all true. After 14 years stored safely in the basement, Frank and Freddy accidentally break the seal on one of the containers, releasing the noxious gas into the air and their own lungs. The chemicals work fast as all the dead things in the warehouse suddenly come to life, while outside it rains back down on the unsuspecting town below. Meanwhile, in a graveyard nearby, a group of punk teens looking for a good time find themselves trapped in the worst zombie horde to hit the United States in a decade and a half. They escape to the crematorium across the street from the very same medical supply warehouse where everything started, with no choice but to find a way to survive the return of the living dead. Thank you to 80stees.com for sponsoring this video. Click the link in the description below and use code TOYGALAXY to get 30% off your order today. I'm currently in my 6th decade on planet Earth. The 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the aughts, the teens, and now the 20s. And while a lot has changed, there's at least one thing that hasn't: my taste in clothing. It's t-shirts all the way back. Lucky for people like me, you know, people with torsos, 80stees.com is also t-shirts all the way back. T-shirts for any occasion you might need a t-shirt for, which, again, for me, is all occasions. Going to the movies, a concert, a ball game, a TED Talk, visiting family, getting groceries, walking the dog, dentist appointment, wedding, optometrist, colonoscopy. Find the shirt that's right for you. And while you're there shopping for yourself, maybe you find something for someone else too. Your mom, your dad, your veterinarian. They've got shirts for teachers, artists, writers, and all your favorite YouTube editors. You can buy the shirt that I'm wearing in the video you're about to watch. Not the actual shirt, but one just like it. Click the link below and use code TOYGALAXY for 30% off your order today. Again, that's code TOYGALAXY for 30% off your order. And thanks again to 80stees.com. The zombie genre of films has been around since at least the 1930s. White Zombie, released in 1932, is generally considered the first true zombie movie. That said, what a zombie is has evolved over time. Through the 30s, 40s, and into the 50s, zombies were generally characterized as mindless, soulless slaves controlled by a singular individual. Voodoo magic is usually involved, and while the zombie state can be permanent, the spell can frequently be broken. As the space race kicked off in the mid-50s, aliens and space contamination took over as the mechanism for turning people into zombies. But more importantly, the 1968 film Night of the Living Dead redefined what zombies and the zombie genre was, and where it fit into film pop culture and American history. Night of the Living Dead was directed by George Romero, written by George Romero and John Russo. Romero and Russo met when they were students at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the late 50s. After graduating, Russo was drafted and spent 2 years in the Army. Romero and another friend, Russell Striner, founded a small production company called The Latent Image and got to work making short films, TV commercials, and segments for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. After his 2 years with the Army were completed, Russo joined the Latent Image with Romero and Striner. With an eye toward producing a feature film, Russo and Romero combined several incomplete ideas into an unfinished script about flesh-eating ghouls and began looking for money to get started. Romero, Russo, and Striner reached out to their friends Carl Hardman and Marilyn Eastman. TV and recording industry veterans, they were the president and vice president of Hardman Associates, a Pittsburgh production center. Together, Romero, Russo, Striner, Hardman, Eastman, and 5 other friends agreed that they would each chip in $600 for a total of $6,000 to kickstart the funding of a feature film, nearly all of whom worked on the film and/or starred in it as well. It was shot between July 1967 and January 1968 with a final budget of roughly $114,000, mostly in and around Evans City, Pennsylvania, including a rented farmhouse that had been condemned, freeing them to damage it as needed. Night of the Living Dead was released on October 1st, 1968. It made roughly $30 million to become one of the most successful independent films of all time, and in the world before the MPAA rating system existed, one of the most controversial. It has been recognized for its social commentary with respect to racial relations in the US and especially the civil rights era, the effect of television on the coverage and conduct of war around the world, establishing the foundation of independent, low-budget horror, and the modern reinvention and redefinition of zombies as cannibalistic, reanimated dead. That said, there were a lot of people involved on the production side of things, and communication wasn't always perfect. Writers Russo and Romero settled on the name Night of the Flesh Eaters when it was handed over to Continental Film distributors. However, Walter Reed Jr., the president and chairman of Continental Film, decided to rename the movie Night of the Living Dead to avoid confusion with another film with a similar name. Unfortunately, Reed neglected to copyright the name, resulting in the movie becoming public domain upon release, opening up the floodgates to bootlegs and unofficial reproductions, leaving the creators with no legal right to profit from them. Not yet, Gene, not yet. Over the course of the next decade, Romero and Russo went their separate ways. By some accounts, this was due to a legal dispute as to who owned the rights to the franchise. Russo insists the truth is far less salacious. As he put it in the book, The Complete History of Return of the Living Dead, quote, "When I left the Latent Image, it was an amicable arrangement. George wanted me to stay, but I decided I had better strike out on my own. Not too long after that, we mutually decided that since we had shared the screenwriting credit for Night of the Living Dead, we should come up with an agreement that enabled each of us to pursue our separate projects." They agreed that Russo could pursue his own vision for what happened next and retain the rights to the Living Dead naming convention, as Russo and Striner wrote a script for The Return of the Living Dead, while Romero could begin production on Dawn of the Dead as an official sequel to Night of the Living Dead. None of the studios were interested in The Return of the Living Dead, so Russo then adapted that script into a novel that was published in 1978, the same year that Romero's Dawn of the Dead was released. Dawn of the Dead is the true sequel to Night of the Living Dead, even though it does not use the Living Dead title. Dawn of the Dead extrapolates forward from the end of Night of the Living Dead and the resulting aftermath on society at large. The zombie infection expanded, and we see the foundations of government, nations, and society in general begin to crumble as the protagonists take shelter in a shopping mall. It is a modern-day classic. While Romero's Dawn of the Dead made $66 million at the box office, the rights to Russo's The Return of the Living Dead novel and screenplay were purchased by producer Tom Fox. According to Fox, no one was interested in Russo's script because it was, quote, very similar to the original Night of the Living Dead, a Pittsburgh farmhouse, a rural area, and all the action takes place in the one farmhouse. Fox was looking for a project he could use to break into the industry as a producer himself. Lucky for him, Romero's Dawn of the Dead once again helped kickstart the zombie genre, and this time reinforced the ticket-selling power of low-budget, grisly horror with a high body count. After a few years of shopping it around, Fox was able to secure financial backing through Hemdale Pictures to move Russo's The Return of the Living Dead into production. According to Russo, he initially expected to direct the film until circumstances changed, saying, quote, "Initially, I was supposed to direct. Then later, for the sake of marketability, I got Tobe Hooper involved." Tobe Hooper, writer, director, producer, and composer of 1974's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was fresh off his most recent project, 1982's Poltergeist. Hooper had the same concern about Russo's script that the rest of the production did. As a straight horror film, it was a bit outdated. To bring it back to life, Hooper brought in his friend, writer Dan O'Bannon. O'Bannon started his career in Hollywood early as a writer, actor, and editor on the 1974 film Dark Star, a science fiction comedy produced and directed by fellow USC student John Carpenter. O'Bannon signed on to supervise special effects for the movie Dune, which was going to be directed by Alejandro Jodorowsky, but that version of the film never made it to production, leaving O'Bannon without a job or a place to live. He spent several years relying on the generosity of friends, bouncing from job to job, including the creation of some visual effects for 1977's Star Wars. Those lean times motivated him to refocus his efforts on writing, the result of which was a collaboration with his friend Ronald Shusett on the story for the 1979 movie Alien. O'Bannon also wrote the screenplay for Alien and worked as a visual design consultant. He followed up the success of Alien by writing 2 segments for the anthology film Heavy Metal, released in 1981, and Blue Thunder, both the movie and the TV series, released in 1983 and 84, respectively. O'Bannon got the call from Tobe Hooper to work on The Return of the Living Dead shortly thereafter, and did a total rewrite in just 4 months, as stated in Fangoria magazine. According to Russo, he no longer had any decision-making power when O'Bannon joined the production. He and 2 of the other creators had already been bought out, which allowed Fox and O'Bannon to do whatever they wanted with Russo's script. O'Bannon described the Russo script as a serious sequel to Night of the Living Dead, which he felt was already happening with Romero's films. To steer clear of Romero, he chose to write a comedy instead. As a nod to its spiritual heritage, O'Bannon used the original 1968 film Night of the Living Dead as the meta-inspiration for the new movie.
Did you see that movie, Night of the Living Dead?
Yeah. That's the one where the corpses start eating the people, right?
See, instead of The Return of the Living Dead happening in the world of Night of the Living Dead, as Romero's Dawn of the Dead can be assumed to have happened, Night of the Living Dead not only happened as a movie in the world of O'Bannon's The Return of the Living Dead, but Romero himself exists there as well. It's not a sequel, it's a meta-sequel.
They were resting in peace until they were rudely interrupted.
What do you want to do, Scud? Sit on the gravestone?
I just want to party.
This place is a mess.
Now look who's awake.
They're on the way.
They're back from the grave and ready to party.
I think things are getting out of hand.
The Return of the Living Dead. Rated R.
To further distance his zombie movie from Romero's, O'Bannon redefined how zombies worked. They could retain some brain function, including speech and problem solving. They could move at normal speed, and they specifically ate only brains because brains helped ease the pain of being dead. However, during the 4-month rewrite, the production lost its funding and its director. Hooper, who intended to shoot Return of the Living Dead in 3D, became frustrated with production delays. He instead accepted a deal with Cannon Films, which resulted in 3 movies released between 1985 and 1986, Life Force, Invaders from Mars, and The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Fox offered O'Bannon the opportunity to direct The Return of the Living Dead, as he said in that same Fangoria article, quote, "We then turned around and immediately hired Dan to direct the film. He seemed to me to be the guy to do it. Obviously, there's no one in the world who knows the script better than Dan, and he's been dying to direct his first big film like this." Filming began in May of 1984 with Burbank, Sylmar, and Los Angeles, California doubling as Louisville, Kentucky. Most of it shot in an old Harley-Davidson warehouse, which had space they converted into sound stages for both the Unita Medical Supply Warehouse and the mortuary. The cast for The Return of the Living Dead included James Karen as Unita Supply Warehouse Manager Frank, Tom Matthews as his new hire Freddie, Clu Gulager as the boss Bert, and Don Calfa as Ernie the gun-toting mortician. The gang of punk teens featured Mark Venturini as Suicide, Linnea Quigley as Trash, Beverly Randolph as Tina, Miguel Nunez as Spider, and the most terrifying member of the cast, Alan Troutman as the zombie Tarman. Tarman is one of several unique zombie designs created for The Return of the Living Dead by production designer William Stout. Yes, the same William Stout, known for his dinosaur illustrations, concept art for the television series Buck Rogers, both Conan the Barbarian and Conan the Destroyer. He did storyboards for Raiders of the Lost Ark, Rambo: First Blood, and in 1987 was the production designer for Cannon's Masters of the Universe. He also did storyboards for Michael Jackson's Thriller video, the scariest music video of all time. We'll come back to that. Stout, always looking to infuse characters with character, has said that his zombie designs were inspired by Mexican mummified corpses and the EC Comics work of artist Ghastly Graham Ingalls. Troutman's acting skill, the suit prosthetics, and a lot of methyl cellulose combined to give Tarman his oozing, drippy, nightmare-inducing performance. Other non-conventional zombie effects were intended to be brought to life by Applied Entertainment, a company who specialized in practical effects for theme parks and restaurants like Chuck E. Cheese. However, this was their first movie project, and as such, according to Stout, their prices and their methods were incompatible with the timeline of the production, and, not for nothing, but a week into production, after they built the cemetery gate and some tombstones, Applied went bankrupt.
Damn, we're in a tight spot.
Some of the work was reassigned to the makeup department, who weren't prepared to handle the kind of effects the production was asking for. Special makeup effects artist Bill Munns was suddenly tasked with creating a lot more effects, including the makeup and suit for the headless yellow corpse in a scene early in the movie with Frank, Freddie, and Bert at the medical supply warehouse. Stout wrote on his blog in 2021 that he wasn't allowed to hire the guys he wanted for the special effects makeup. He had friends like Rick Baker, but instead had to hire guys like Bill Munns, who he called, quote, a decent enough guy, but I was not happy with almost anything he was doing makeup-wise. Stout was particularly disappointed with the shot of a skeleton popping up out of a grave and turning its head as its jaw opens, an iconic image that Stout thought was just a placeholder. Not yet. We're almost there. According to O'Bannon, even he didn't notice until it was too late because in his words, quote, I was so busy being disappointed by other things that I didn't have time to be disappointed with that one.
Damn, we're in a tight spot.
Bill Munns was let go and replaced with special effects makeup artist Kenny Myers on the condition that Myers be allowed to hire his own makeup team. With that power in hand, he hired rookie makeup artist Tony Gardner, who was able to design and complete both the split dog and half corpse, two of the most difficult effects in the movie that were supposed to be handled by Applied Entertainment before they went out of business. The Return of the Living Dead was originally slated to premiere in LA and New York in September 1985 before a wider release in October. Overwhelmingly positive response during test screenings gave distributor Orion Pictures the confidence to move it up to August. Specifically, August 16th, just 28 days later than Romero's Day of the Dead, his second sequel to Night of the Living Dead. And it absolutely created confusion for ticket buyers and absolutely directly negatively impacted customers who thought they were going to see Romero's dramatic film, but ended up at O'Bannon's comedy. Romero himself was frustrated because the agreement for the split Living Dead franchises was with Russo and Russo's script, not whatever this was that evolved in its place. And furthermore, the media and promotion of The Return of the Living Dead didn't make a clear distinction between the two properties. As he said in The Zombies That Ate Pittsburgh, quote, Entertainment Tonight announced it as George A. Romero's Return of the Living Dead. I hated the way the whole thing went down, and I'm glad it's over. It was all dirty pool, and I never want to get into anything like that again. Russo and I were trying to preserve our friendship during it all, and it got crazy. I think he was screwed as well as everyone else. The film is his in title only. Regardless of the behind-the-scenes drama, audiences seemed to like the refreshing comedic spin of The Return of the Living Dead, as it ended up making back its $4 million budget in the first 2 weeks before going on to a final tally of roughly $14 million. FYI, Romero's Day of the Dead did just fine with $34 million against the same budget as Return. Reviews for The Return of the Living Dead were solid, with the Houston Post calling it either the funniest horror movie or the most horrifying funny movie of the summer. Michael Healy said it was an extremely sick movie that the squeamish should avoid at the peril of losing their popcorn. On the other hand, the movie is extremely funny in parts, so funny that it redeems itself from being an altogether repulsive exploitation film. Barry Paris said, You've got to have a stomach stronger than mine to find it all a laugh riot. My spirit was unwilling and my flesh even weaker. It must be reported, however, that yesterday's matinee audience at the Fiesta lustily screamed and cheered the victims' hapless escape efforts. The Return of the Living Dead was released on VHS in 1986, MGM produced a special edition DVD in 2002, a collector's edition was released in 2007, Scream Factory released a 30th anniversary edition in 2016. It should be noted that some of these releases featured different music due to copyright issues and in some cases, a different voice for Tarman.
Who's there? There.
It should also be noted that the 1985 novelization of the 1985 movie The Return of the Living Dead was written by the same John Russo that wrote the 1978 novel The Return of the Living Dead, which was an adaptation of the screenplay written by John Russo for the movie called The Return of the Living Dead, which was never produced. The Return of the Living Dead Part 2 hit theaters in January 1988. Written and directed by Ken Wiederhorn, it too features a group of people trying to escape a zombie outbreak. James Karen and Tom Matthews returned to the series, but in different roles. Part 2 suggests that electrifying the zombies is the only way to kill the zombies without creating more zombies because it fully deactivates the ingredients in the 2,4,5-trioxin. It barely made back its $6 million budget, which ironically was not an effective way to kill these zombies. Because Part 3 hit theaters in October 1993, produced and directed by Brian Yuzna, the same Brian Yuzna who produced the Reanimator movies, it absolutely tanked at the box office, making $54,000 against its $2 million budget, bringing the franchise to an end. Until Return of the Living Dead Necropolis and Return of the Living Dead Rave to the Grave. Both films shot in Romania and Ukraine, both released on Sci-Fi Channel in October 2005, both released on DVD, the first in 2006 and the second in 2007. Must have been some trioxin in the air because in July 2023, a franchise reboot was announced, followed by a teaser trailer in December 2024 produced by With an O Productions and Living Dead Media, LLC. Written and directed by Steve Walsh, it is said to take place in December 1985, just 18 months after the events of the first Return of the Living Dead. It was originally planned to be released in December 2025 during the 40th anniversary of the film, but that has been pushed back to an as-yet undetermined date. The Return of the Living Dead reboot may be up against another The Return of the Living Dead movie. ROTLD Originals LLC is working to crowdfund a film that would be a meta-sequel to the original The Return of the Living Dead, with Linnea Quigley returning to the franchise to play herself in the real world. Or not. Hard to say where either project is going or if they'll ever be released. The rights to the franchise are being claimed by both Living Dead Media and ROTLD Originals. With any luck, they'll have it sorted out by the 50th anniversary in 2035. Roger Ebert proclaimed that The Return of the Living Dead doesn't make the mistake of Day of the Dead talking too much. It's kind of a sensation machine made out of the usual ingredients, and the real question is whether it's done with style. It is! He also said, if you are below a certain age, I suppose it's scary and the R rating is richly deserved. Boy, was he right about that. See, I was 7 years old in 1983 when Michael Jackson's Thriller video was released, and it was the scariest thing I had ever seen in my life up to that point. For context, I was still getting over the fear that Darth Vader was the monster that lived under my bed at night. Yeah, it's absurd now to think that a music video starring Michael Jackson could even be scary, but at the time, I also thought he was a rebellious badass. I thought he was saying fucking instead of funky in Beat It. I was, technically, stupid. The visual effects are graphic and intense. Vincent Price says hell, which actually was a swear word in my house, and I didn't even know what rot inside a corpse's shell meant. For whatever reason, it was the zombies rising from the grave that stuck with me, not the silly dancing they did just moments later. I may have been too young to see Thriller when I did. I was definitely too young to see The Return of the Living Dead when I did. My older brother had some friends over for a Halloween sleepover in 1987. It was the first year we had cable, and my parents gave them permission to watch a couple of rated R movies to celebrate the season. I insisted that I was, at 11 years old, fully capable of handling whatever a movie could throw at me. I had, after all, already seen Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and Gremlins, the two movies that caused the invention of the PG-13 rating, and Red Dawn, the first movie to get that rating upon release. Trash dancing naked in the cemetery wasn't the best way to see a nude woman for the first time. The half-zombie tied to the table in the mortuary was not a great follow-up. And not for nothing, but the second movie we watched that night was Sleepaway Camp. I had questions after the double feature. First and foremost, women. How do they work? As I sat there in the darkness, my Super Friends sleeping bag pulled up to my throat, I watched in actual horror as the half-dogs came to life. The yellow corpse ran around headless and naked while the sounds of adult men screaming in terror poured out of the television. The shock of seeing Tarman on screen and his undulating, combined with the weirdly synthesized voice, continues to reverberate in my subconscious to this day. That said, I have seen it several times in the last 40 years. I am now profoundly aware of its influences, production history, legacy in film, pop culture, and American history. I have come to terms with its influence, for better or for worse, on me. And while I don't actually think it's scary anymore, there will always be a part of me that is terrified by the return of the living dead. Thanks for watching. Please hit like, hit subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Thank you very much to those of you who already are. Please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/toygalaxy. Several different tiers to address your specific Secret Galaxy content needs. Check out the Secret Galaxy merch shop at secretgalaxy.shop. All merchandise is physically in stock and ready to ship. Links to all of this in the description below. Let us know in the comments down below how old you were the first time you saw The Return of the Living Dead. Of all the movies to have a weird lifelong relationship with, this one has always stood out for me for all the reasons I stated in this video. There is almost nothing in my life that has affected me so profoundly than this movie. Artax sinking into the swamp of sadness was sad, sure, but Tarman? Let's just say I never look under my bed at night, just to be safe. Can you imagine him undulating under there?